The morning felt heavy long before the tragedy struck. It was a gray December dawn, the kind of damp, bone-deep cold that doesn't startle you, but instead seeps into the wood of the house until the floorboards groan under the weight of it. I sat in the dim light of my childhood bedroom, clutching a mug of coffee that felt more like a lifeline than a drink, staring at the same stale job listings I'd memorized weeks ago. At 31, my life had narrowed down to a series of hollow routines and the quiet, uneven breathing of my daughter, Lennox, sleeping nearby. That sound was the only thing that kept the shame of being unemployed and back in my parents' house from swallowing me whole. I told people my wife and I were just separated, because it was a cleaner lie, a way to avoid the jagged edges of the truth that people don't like to hear from a man. We were happy once, back when Lennox was born and the exhaustion felt earned. But then something inside her snapped, turning our life into a slow-motion wreck I'm still trying to crawl out of. Her patience didn't just fray, it evaporated, replaced by a temper that cut like a razor. Slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, that venom began to target a baby who couldn't understand the words, but felt every bit of the malice behind them. It started with slammed doors and ended with her screaming, "Shut up," into the face of a sobbing 18-month-old. That was the night the silence in our house became a weapon. I packed our lives into a few bags and drove to my mother's while the echoes of CPS interviews and police questions still hung in the air. They told me I was doing the right thing, but as I sat there, it didn't feel like a rescue, it felt like a collapse. Around 3:30 p.m. Lennox stirred from her nap, blinking up at the ceiling fan with a soft babble. "Hey, Peanut," I murmured, lifting her small, warm weight. "You hungry?" She pointed a finger toward the door and gave her universal command, "Go." It was her word for everything, the park, the car, the world outside this cramped bedroom. The Northway Market was only 3 blocks away, a gritty, local spot that smelled of floor wax and day-old bread, where the sale signs were scrawled in hurried Sharpie. I let her walk, her tiny hand tucked into mine, because she hated the confinement of a cart and I needed to feel like I was finally giving her some version of freedom. She chirped hi at every stranger we passed, her voice a squeaky, proud little bell in the middle of that drab grocery store. A few people smiled back, completely unaware that we were walking straight into a nightmare. Total strangers waved back, offering the usual clichés about how fast the time flies, and for a fleeting moment, I felt like a normal father. I balanced flour, sugar, and noodles in my arms, cursing my own stupidity for not grabbing a basket, a tiny, trivial mistake that would eventually haunt every waking hour of my life. Lennox moved at a toddler's pace, treating every brightly colored box on the bottom shelf like a hidden treasure. I was exhausted and drowning in stress, but I kept my voice a gentle tether. After what she'd been through with her mother, I refused to let her hear a single sharp word from me. We reached the front of the store, waiting at the customer service desk while the clerk finished a return. I crouched down to her level, playing a messy, offbeat game of patty cake that sent her into a fit of giggles. She waved her tiny hand at a passing man, "Hi," and he gave a stiff, awkward smile before moving on. I didn't feel the eyes on us. I didn't sense the shift in the air. The clerk finally beckoned us forward, and I told Lennox to hold my hand. She obeyed, her small fingers curling around mine. I turned just long enough to reach for my wallet, breaking contact for no more than 3 seconds. In that heartbeat, the world fractured. My brain went numb, struggling to process a sight so jarring it felt like a hallucination. Through the haze of my own shock, I watched as a pair of strange arms reached out of the blur and clamped tight around my daughter's waist. He hoisted her into the air like she was nothing, a bag of groceries, a piece of discarded luggage, anything but my entire soul. For a paralyzed heartbeat, my brain refused to scream, "Danger," only whispering, "This is wrong." Then Lennox let out a sound I had never heard. A sharp, primal shriek of pure terror that tore through the store and emptied the lungs right out of my body. "Hey! What are you doing with his daughter?" the cashier screamed, her voice fracturing as the man bolted. He lunged for the entrance, Lennox thrashing so violently that one of her tiny shoes dangled by the heel. I dropped my wallet, credit cards skittering across the tile like dead leaves, but my world had already narrowed to a single point of focus. The man slammed into the glass doors, but they wouldn't budge. They were one way, entrance only from the outside. Panic flared in his eyes as he found himself trapped by the very glass he thought was his escape. "I'm calling the police," the cashier yelled, her hand fumbling for the phone. In the blur of motion, my hand brushed the small folding knife clipped inside my jacket pocket, a tool for opening boxes and juice seals, but I didn't draw it. I don't know if it was restraint or sheer adrenaline, but I didn't want the last thing my daughter saw to be a blade. Instead, I became the weapon. I didn't aim, I just threw my entire weight into a swing. My fist collided with the side of his head, a sickening thud that vibrated all the way up my shoulder. He staggered, his knees buckling, and for one glorious second, his grip on my daughter began to fail. I ripped Lennox from his grasp, pulling her into my chest with a force that nearly knocked us both over. She latched onto me, her tiny fingers anchoring into my jacket while her desperate, wet sobs soaked through my collar. "I've got you," I hissed into her hair, my own voice trembling. "I've got you. Daddy's here." The man didn't stay to fight. He cast one wild, hollow look over his shoulder before disappearing through the exit. I collapsed against the counter, my legs turning to water, feeling her heart drumming a frantic, terrified rhythm against my own. Someone pressed her missing shoe into my hand, another woman nearby drifted into a panicked loop of, "Oh my God." The sirens arrived within minutes, bleeding red and blue light across the linoleum. I gave the officers the details, but the description felt sickeningly generic: shaggy hair, a beard, a hoodie, a man who could disappear into any crowd in America. That was the most terrifying part, he was a ghost. While they checked alleys and dumpsters, an officer eventually drove us home. Lennox had gone silent, her exhaustion so deep she looked brittle. Back at the house, the questions shifted toward my life, my wife, the CPS visits, the police who had already been at my door that morning. They took their notes and offered the same hollow praise about me doing the right thing, before finally leaving us in a house that felt far too quiet. I sat on the couch in the dim light of a half-broken Christmas tree, watching Lennox sleep on my chest, my mind spinning in the silence. 20 minutes later, the knocking started again. I almost let the knocking go unanswered. When I finally pulled the door open, the same officers were standing on the porch, their arms overflowing. They carried a massive box of diapers, bags of groceries stacked toward their chins, and toy bags tucked under their elbows. One of them held out a Christmas card, his voice dropping to a low, sincere murmur: "We couldn't stop thinking about you. About everything you've been carrying." I tried to find the words to thank them, but my body gave out first. My knees hit the floor and I broke, sobbing with a jagged, ugly intensity that only comes from holding the world together for too long. They didn't rush me, they just waited in the cold. Inside the card, handwritten ink told me I was a strong father and that my daughter was lucky to have me. I didn't spend a cent of the cash they tucked inside on myself. It went to extra gifts for my mother and the toy kitchen Lennox had been eyeing for months. On Christmas morning, watching her tear into the wrapping paper with a laugh that showed no scars of the trauma, something finally stilled in my chest. I still don't know who that man was or if he's still out there, but I know that every time Lennox waves at a stranger now, I am an inch away. I keep her within reach, a silent vow forged in the aisles of that store. Sometimes I still drift back to how deceptively normal that evening felt before the world cracked open. I had always loved the specific silence of Christmas Eve. Not the cinematic version of big dinners, but the heavy, velvet calm that settles after sundown when the rest of the world retreats indoors. By 7 o'clock, our neighborhood went dead. No tires on the pavement, no shouting kids, just the mechanical hum of heaters and the distant, lonely bark of a dog. We lived in a small rental on a dead-end street outside Ridgewood Flats, a semi-rural pocket where the houses are separated by enough trees that you never stumble onto a neighbor by accident. It wasn't quite the wilderness, but it was isolated enough that headlights in the driveway actually meant something. They meant a visitor, or they meant trouble. I was curled up on the couch with my fiancé, Caleb, drifting in that hazy space between distraction and relaxation. The cable had cut out 20 minutes prior, and we were currently in the middle of some half-hearted troubleshooting. Unplugging cables, Googling modem models, and trading low-stakes barbs about whether the weather or the company's incompetence was to blame. The room was bathed in the soft, amber glow of a single lamp by the window, while the darkened TV screen acted as a black mirror, reflecting our silhouettes back at us. Our front door, with its large oval glass pane, sat directly across from us, flanked by two expansive windows that overlooked the driveway. Usually, those windows were a source of light, but tonight they were just voids of pitch-black glass. I leaned back, sighing that if the signal wasn't back by morning, I'd be making a phone call. Caleb just snorted, muttering that they'd find a way to blame us for the outage anyway. I was still smiling at his cynicism when the night fractured. The sudden, violent scream of tires against gravel tore through the silence, much too fast for a driveway as short as ours. An engine revved with a desperate roar before cutting out into a jagged silence. High beams washed over the living room walls, blinding and intrusive. Before the echoes could die down, two car doors slammed with a heavy thud, followed by a loud, aggressive shout, "Hey, it's us." The voices were right on top of the house, raw and demanding. My immediate reaction wasn't fear, but a sharp spike of irritation. "Oh my God," I muttered, my stomach knotting at the intrusion. "Please don't tell me that's your cousin." I turned to Caleb, ready to roll my eyes, but he was already moving. He didn't hesitate or look confused, he moved with a sudden, jagged urgency that made my blood run cold. In 2 strides, he vanished down the hallway toward the back bedroom without a single word of explanation. Caleb wasn't a man who spooked easily, he was the type to undersell a crisis, so the fact that he fled without looking back left a hollow pit in my stomach. Outside, the shouting escalated into a demand, "Open the door." The porch groaned under the weight of heavy boots. I turned toward the window just as a face smashed against the glass. He was in his late 30s, scruffy and wide-eyed, his breath fogging the pain as he stared through the reflection and directly into my soul. He slammed his fist against the frame, the vibration rattling my teeth. Behind him, a second man was violently wrenching the front door handle, his hands cupped around his eyes as he peered through the oval glass. "Let us in," he roared. "Come on." There was no hint of wrong address, confusion or drunken blundering in his voice. This was calculated, aggressive, and terrifyingly urgent. My mind raced, trying to invent a peaceful explanation, an emergency, a mistake, anything, but the reality was crashing in too fast. "Babe!" I screamed, my voice fracturing. "Caleb!" There was no reply from the hallway. The man at the window leaned in until his forehead was nearly touching the glass, his voice a low, jagged threat, "Don't act like you don't know us. We know you're home." I slid off the couch, my legs turning to lead, and tried to find a scrap of courage. "I'm calling the cops." I yelled toward the door. The man on the porch didn't flinch, he just let out a sharp, humorless laugh that made my skin crawl. "Go ahead," he threw back, his voice chillingly indifferent. "Just open the damn door." I scrambled backward toward the hallway, the pulse in my throat drummed so violently it was painful. Caleb emerged from the shadows of the bedroom then, his face set in a grim, rigid mask. In his hand was the pistol. He didn't aim it, he just kept it low at his side, his knuckles white. "Leave," he commanded, his voice a steady, terrifying calm. "Now." The men on the porch froze, the air between us turning electric for a heartbeat. The one at the window finally recoiled, raising his palms in a mock gesture of surrender. "Whoa, man," he muttered. "No need for that. They retreated toward the driveway, and for a second, I let myself believe the nightmare was over. I took a single step toward the door, but as soon as my shadow flickered across the oval glass, they surged back like a wave hitting a seawall. "Open it!" The man screamed, his fist hammering the wood. The other raced back to the side window, rattling the frame until the glass groaned. "We're not messing around. You hear me?" My fingers fumbled over my phone, nearly dropping it as I frantically dialed 911. I retreated deep into the hallway, pressing my spine against the wall and peering through a sliver of the kitchen window. They were pacing now, agitated, predatory. Then the absurdity started. They began shouting names. "Ryan, it's me. Come on, man, you know who I am." Name after name followed, none of them ours, none of them familiar, a litany of strangers called out into the dark. The dispatcher's voice finally broke through the static in my head, calm, professional, a world away from the chaos. 911, what is your emergency?" I whispered into the receiver, my voice a jagged thread. "There are 2 men trying to break into my house. They're on the porch. They won't leave." I stumbled over our address as she asked if they were armed. "I don't know," I choked out. "They're aggressive. They're trying to get in." She told me help was coming, told me to stay on the line, but outside, the tone changed. The man by the truck looked back at the house, his eyes burning with a parting threat. "This ain't over," he roared. The other one leaned in toward the glass one last time, his features twisting into a grotesque sneer. "Merry Christmas," he said, the words slow and dripping with malice. "Hope you sleep real good tonight." Then they were gone. Car doors slammed like gunshots, the engine roared, and gravel sprayed in a frantic arc as the truck tore down the dead-end road. They didn't stop at a neighbor's or slow down to check a house number, they simply vanished into the night. When the police arrived 10 minutes later, the air in the house had already curdled. It felt violated, a sanctuary turned into a cage where every shadow looked like a threat and every floorboard creak sounded like a footstep. The officers shined their flashlights into the tree line and took our statements, offering the hollow theory of a wrong address or drunk mistake, but nothing about that level of aggression felt like an accident. No one ever followed up. No one was ever caught. Caleb and I sat in the dark until the sun came up, the Christmas lights blinking rhythmically in the corner while the cable stayed dead. The silence was heavy, a suffocating weight that felt nothing like peace. I still think about it every Christmas Eve, how quickly normal can turn into a nightmare, and how some people don't knock to be invited in, they knock because they expect you to break. Now, Christmas always makes me tired before it makes me happy. It's not the warm exhaustion of a day well spent, but a slow, bone-deep ache that settles in after sunset when the world is performing a joy you don't quite feel. That year, the holiday fell on a weekday, carrying that strange pressure to be festive even though a regular workday loomed just over the horizon. Outside, a soft, relentless snow had been falling since dawn, muffling the world into an eerie, unreal quiet. I woke up early, my eyes snapping open despite my best intentions to sleep in. That's always been my curse, an inability to switch off, even when the rest of the world has finally gone still. I can never truly relax on holidays. My mind just ticks away like a countdown, waiting for the other shoe to drop. When I wandered into the kitchen, my partner, Hari, was already entrenched, hoodie up, hair a mess, eyes fused to his phone screen. "Morning," I murmured. "Merry Christmas," he replied, his gaze never shifting. We didn't do the performative joy of matching pajamas or forced traditions, our ritual was simpler: coffee, silence, and the eventual arrival of food. By noon, the apartment was a haze of reheated leftovers and bitter coffee grounds. Outside, the street was a ghost town, curtains pulled tight, cars buried under a layer of white, the entire world on a temporary, eerie pause. Around 3, Hari retreated to the bedroom with his laptop, tossing out "steam sail" as a universal excuse for his looming disappearance. When I checked on him later, he was already gone, lost to the blue glow of the monitor and the frantic clicking of his keyboard. By early evening, the boredom became a physical weight. I texted an old friend across town and, finding them home, pulled on my boots and coat. "I'm heading out, back later," I called out. "Don't wait up," Hari answered, his attention never wavering from the game. The visit was pleasant, perhaps too much so, the kind of evening where you exhume old memories only to realize how much they've decayed. We drank tea and laughed about people who were no longer in our lives, but by 9, my energy crashed. Then my phone buzzed, Jerry and the bandmates coming over. Old days, guitar stuff. I sighed, texting back that I was exhausted. "Won't be late." "Promise," he replied. I'd heard that promise before, but I started the trek back anyway, my breath fogging in the dark as my boots crunched through the untouched snow. The streetlights threw long, skeletal shadows across the white drifts. When I finally unlocked the door, I didn't find the quiet I expected, I found voices. The air hit me first, the sharp, cloying scent of cognac. 2 strangers were rooted on my couch, standing in unison as I entered. The man was a towering, broad-shouldered figure with a shaved head and tattoos that looked like they'd survived several lifetimes. The woman was stocky, her deep red hair showing inches of dark roots, both of them dressed in black like it was a uniform. They were wearing sunglasses indoors. I raised an eyebrow, the silence stretching thin until Hari broke it with a grin. "This is her," he said, gesturing toward me. "My better half." The woman's smile was wide and practiced as she stepped into my personal space. "You must be the famous one," she said. I offered a dry, awkward laugh. "Depends on who you ask. I've changed their names here because they don't deserve the dignity of being remembered as they were. Let's call them Vince and Lotta." They shook my hand with a firmness that felt disturbingly normal. That's the word that haunts me now. Normal. We waded into the small talk, drifting through conversations about music, defunct venues, and the city's changing landscape. Lotta spoke of her grown children with the pride of any mother, while Vince peppered the air with jokes in a thick, rolling accent. I tried to keep the tone light, though the exhaustion was winning. "I'm heading to bed soon," I warned, only half joking. "If things get too loud, I'm kicking the lot of you out." They laughed in unison, Lotta placing a dramatic hand over her heart. "We wouldn't dare," she promised. I believed her, or at least, I let myself believe her. I didn't stay in the living room much longer. It wasn't a deliberate exit, just my body finally opting out of a social contract my mind was too tired to sign. I perched on the arm of the couch for a few final minutes, listening to Vince and Hari chase ghosts. Bands I'd never heard of and venues that had long since been leveled. The cognac bottle sat between them on the coffee table, the level of the amber liquid dropping with alarming speed. Hari was pouring with a heavy, reckless hand. I watched him drain his glass, the familiar flush creeping into his cheeks, a sight that always made my stomach knot. He wasn't a violent man, but that specific shade of red meant the alcohol was loosening something deep inside him, something that was better left tied down. A fuse shortened, and his words began to sharpen around the edges. I caught Lotta watching him, not with judgment, but with a cold, quiet assessment. She crossed her legs and turned her focus to me. "You're not from around here, are you?" she asked. I told her I'd moved here years ago, and she nodded slowly, noting how difficult the shift in culture must have been. "You get used to it," I replied. Vince let out a short laugh, remarking that I still apologized when people bumped into me. I forced a smile, but his comment felt invasive, carrying a weight of familiarity that shouldn't have been there. Eventually, the guitar came out. Hari strummed while Vince joined in with clumsy, arrogant fingers, and Lotta swayed to the rhythm with her eyes closed. It was a pleasant enough scene, but the exhaustion was pulling at me like a tide. Around midnight, I finally reached my limit. "I'm calling it," I announced. "Early night for me." Lotta stood abruptly and pulled me into a hug, her arms surprisingly strong and firm. "Sleep well," she whispered directly into my ear. Vince merely raised his glass in a mock salute, promising to keep the volume down. "I've heard that one before," I joked, heading toward the bedroom. I left the door cracked just enough to monitor the room, listening as the music faded into the low hum of conversation and the rhythmic clinking of glasses. For a while, I drifted in and out of a light sleep, scolding myself for being so paranoid. Then, the darkness shattered. I woke up choking on the sound of raw, predatory shouting. The kind of noise that bypasses logic and triggers a frantic, hammering pulse. I sat bolt upright, disoriented, as the blood-red digits of the alarm clock burned into my vision. 5:02 a.m. The sound of something heavy shattering in the living room acted like a starter pistol. "Enough," someone roared, met by a slurred, venomous retort. I swung my legs out of bed, adrenaline incinerating the last of my sleep as I yanked my hoodie over my head and stepped into the hall. The living room light bled into the corridor like an open wound. There stood Hari, his frame rigid and hunched, arm extended with a kitchen knife leveled directly at Vince's chest. In that surreal, slowed-down moment, a stray thought flickered through my brain. It was the good knife, the one I always warned him to keep out of the sink. Vince was paralyzed, hands half-raised, while Lotta stood between them with the practiced ease of a woman who had spent a lifetime mediating violence. A chaotic collision of Finnish, English, and drunken vitriol filled the air. "What the hell is going on?" I screamed. No one looked at me. I moved on instinct. "Hari," I said, my voice cutting through the noise. "Put it down." He turned, his eyes glassy and vacant, his jaw clenched with enough force to shatter bone. "They disrespected me," he spat. "In my own house." I stepped closer, my eyes locked on the glinting steel. "Put the knife down." For a heartbeat, I thought he might actually turn the blade on me, but then his fingers unfurled. I snatched the knife, my own hands trembling as I moved it to the counter, well out of reach. "Everyone, calm the hell down," I commanded, my voice sounding unnervingly cold and steady. The room shifted into a low, jagged simmer, slurred accusations of loyalty and respect being dragged up like corpses. Then Lotta spoke, her voice suddenly sharp enough to pierce the fog. She turned to Hari, her words slow and deliberate. "How would you feel if I held a knife to your woman?" A heavy, suffocating silence followed. I nodded, thinking she was appealing to his conscience. "Exactly. Think about that." Lotta turned her gaze to me then, really looked at me, and her mouth curled into a knowing, icy smile. My skin began to prickle. The fire of the argument finally starved out, replaced by the hollow, exhausted apologies of the drunk. Vince and Lotta grabbed their coats, their movements heavy. "We should go," Lotta said. They hugged Hari, then me, Lotta's grip lingering just a second too long. "You're always welcome to visit," she whispered. I forced a smile until the door finally clicked shut. Neither of us moved, the apartment holding its breath amidst the cloying scent of cognac and a faint, metallic tang I couldn't identify. I locked the deadbolt and leaned my weight against the wood. "What the hell was that?" I asked quietly. Hari collapsed onto the couch, buried his head in his hands with his elbows dug into his knees. "I don't know," he muttered, his voice hollow. "I don't even remember picking up the knife." That admission chilled me more than the blade itself. I retreated to the kitchen and scrubbed my hands under the faucet, even though they were clean, unable to find a temperature that didn't feel like it was burning or freezing my skin. When I returned, he looked broken. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I shouldn't drink that stuff. It messes with my head." I just nodded. I'd heard the apology before, but this time the air felt different, heavier, more permanent. We went back to bed but left the lights burning, the silence of the room amplified by the racing of my heart. I kept replaying Lotta's words, "How would you feel if I held a knife to your woman?" She hadn't sounded angry, she had sounded certain. Just as the edges of sleep began to blur, Hari spoke into the dark. "You know, they're not just old bandmates." I shifted, my eyes snapping open. "What do you mean?" He hesitated, the tension in the bed becoming a physical wall between us. "They've killed people," he said. I sat up so fast the blankets hissed against the floor. "What? They're murderers?" He rubbed his face, his voice barely a murmur. "A long time ago. Before I really knew them. They both did time for it." My mouth went dry, the air in the room suddenly too thin to breathe. "You're joking." "I'm not." "How many?" I pressed, my voice trembling. "I don't know," he replied. "A couple. Maybe more." It was complicated. I thought of Lotta's smile, the way she had embraced me, and the terrifyingly normal way she spoke about her children. "You let them into our house," I said, the words landing like lead. He started to say he didn't think, but I snapped, "No, you didn't." He went quiet, and sleep became an impossibility. The following days were a slow-motion nightmare of normalcy. There were no ominous knocks, no threatening messages, no grand revelations, just the stubborn continuation of daily life, which somehow made the truth more grotesque. I was haunted by how easily I had stepped between them, how instinctively I had trusted Lotta's logic. I began to re-examine every detail of the night through a new, jagged lens. I remembered how Vince never looked afraid, not even with a knife to his chest. I remembered how Lotta positioned herself with tactical precision, always sideways, always ready. Her calm wasn't a personality trait, it was a veteran's composure. It wasn't instinct. It was experience. One night, I asked Hari if they ever talked about what they'd done. He just shook his head. "No," he said. "Not directly." That silence was more terrifying than any boast could have been. People who brag are seeking validation, but people who don't need to speak are simply comfortable with the darkness they carry. The Christmas decorations stayed up long past the holiday that year. I couldn't summon the energy to pack them away, the blinking lights felt like a hollow performance, a forced cheer that didn't match the cold weight sitting in my chest. I thought about Lotta's parting invitation, "You're always welcome to visit," knowing with absolute certainty that we never would. Weeks bled into months. Hari stopped drinking entirely, a quiet, undramatic shift that saw the cognac stay untouched until it was eventually poured away. Sometimes, in the dead of night, I'd lie awake listening to the snow muffled against the glass and the city breathing in the distance, thinking about how seamlessly evil can blend into the mundane. It laughs at your jokes, it reminisces about its children, and it hugs you goodnight before stepping out into the freezing air. If I saw them on the street tomorrow, I wouldn't even think to cross to the other side, and that is the most haunting realization of all. To the couple who spent Christmas in my living room, the ones who drank our liquor, forgave our outbursts, and left like any other guests, let's not meet again. Back then, I was 24, and December carried a bone-deep chill that ignored every layer of clothing I owned. It was the kind of cold that fogged up car windows and made Christmas music feel like a relentless countdown rather than a celebration. I remember sitting on the edge of my bed, pulling on thick socks and watching the snow drift past the window, convinced the day would be entirely unremarkable. No plans, no drama, just a trip to the mall to use a stupid coupon for free underwear. That winter had already been a gauntlet. I was working full-time and barely sleeping, living in a state of low-level anxiety that I couldn't articulate without sounding paranoid. My boyfriend told me I was wound too tight, that I needed to breathe. "I'm fine," I lied, but the truth was I'd been raised by a single mother who taught me that awareness wasn't a choice, it was survival. Don't walk with headphones in. Always check the back seat. Park under the lights. Those lessons were etched into my DNA. So, when my friend Jessa texted me about a girls' day, lunch, the mall, and finally using those expiring coupons, I said yes immediately. I was desperate for a dose of the normal everyone else seemed to enjoy. Jessa pulled up at noon in her dented silver sedan, Christmas baubles rattling on the dashboard as she grinned at me. "Ready to spend money we don't have," she joked. I told her I wasn't spending a dime, that was the beauty of a freebie. She just laughed, calling me out on a lie we both knew I'd probably break. The roads were a mess of dirty slush and holiday traffic, with everyone driving like they were late for a crisis. The mall parking lot was pure chaos, a sprawling sea of cars fighting over spots that didn't even exist. We finally squeezed into a space near the entrance and hurried inside, shivering and pulling our coats tight against the wind. Hawthorne Plaza was a sensory overload of cinnamon, pine cleaner, and fake garlands draped over every available railing. It was loud, bright, and crowded with crying toddlers and teenagers killing time. I remember a specific thought crossing my mind: I'm safe here. It was too public, too busy for anything to happen. But that kind of security is a trap. After a burger at the food court and an hour of Jessa's non-stop updates on her roommate drama and dating apps, she finally stood up. "Underwear time," she announced. I rolled my eyes and followed her toward the store, which was glowing in its usual aggressive palette of pink and gold. That's when I saw him. He was standing just outside the entrance, a massive, immovable wall of a man. He wore a heavy dark hoodie and baggy jeans, his hands buried deep in his front pocket as he rocked slowly on his heels. He wasn't browsing. He wasn't waiting for a girlfriend. He was just staring straight ahead with a focus that didn't belong in a mall. I slowed my pace as we approached. "Hey," I murmured, "you see that guy?" Jessa gave him a casual, disinterested glance. "Yeah, probably just waiting for someone." "Why?" I couldn't pin it down. "I don't know. Just a weird vibe." She shrugged it off with a smirk, reminding me that I was the one who noticed everything. She wasn't wrong. We brushed past him and into the store, where the air was thick with the scent of perfume and the glow of soft lighting. We fell into our usual rhythm, mocking the prices, comparing lace, and laughing until the tension in my shoulders finally began to dissolve. For a few minutes, the man outside was a ghost I'd already forgotten. We redeemed our coupons, secured our small victory, and headed back out. The moment we stepped back into the corridor, my eyes scanned the crowd. He was gone. I felt a flash of self-consciousness, embarrassed by the wave of relief that washed over me. We started walking toward the center of the mall, Jessa insisting on finding something obnoxiously Christmassy at Claire's. As we moved, that prickling sensation returned, the heavy, unmistakable weight of being watched. I tried to dismiss it as holiday paranoia, but my body refused to relax. Claire's was a cramped, neon-lit labyrinth of glitter and plastic. I hated the tight quarters, but I followed her in any way. We were hovering by a rotating rack of earrings when I caught a movement in the mirror. My stomach didn't just drop, it turned to lead. It was him. The same man from before was standing right behind us, not just nearby, but within arm's reach. I stepped to the side, masquerading as a casual shopper, and he mirrored the movement instantly. I shifted again, he followed. This wasn't a coincidence or a crowded mall mishap. This was a hunt. I made the mistake of looking up, catching his gaze for a split second. His face was a terrifying blank, his heavy-lidded eyes fixed on me while a faint, hollow smile touched his lips. In that moment, I felt something click. He had locked onto me, and he wasn't letting go. That internal alarm was screaming at me, wrong, 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 but I tried to suffocate the sound. I told myself it was just a crowded store, just the friction of people moving in a tight space. But my body wasn't buying the lie. My pulse hammered against my eardrums, and my shoulders stayed braced as if for a collision. I could feel the heat coming off him, heavy and oppressive. I bent down to a lower rack, feigning interest in tiny plastic candy canes and glittery snowflakes, just to see if he'd move on. He didn't. He moved closer. His worn-out sneakers were inches from mine, toes pointed directly at me with a terrifyingly singular focus. I straightened up and glanced at Jessa. She was still smiling at the wall, adrift in her own world. I didn't want to be the girl who caused a scene. I didn't want to be dramatic. So, I did what we're conditioned to do, I tried to be polite. I turned my head just enough to offer a small, awkward courtesy smile. The reaction was instantaneous and wrong. A switch flipped behind his eyes, and his mouth curled into a tight, controlled expression that made my stomach turn to lead. He stared at me without blinking, the silence between us stretching until it snapped. In that moment, my cousin's old warning echoed in my skull, being nice gets you hurt. I broke eye contact and crouched down again, desperately pretending to browse the bottom rack. That's when the world narrowed to a single, sickening realization. I saw his hands vanish beneath the front of his hoodie. I tried to tell myself he was just adjusting his clothes or reaching for a phone, but then I heard it. A soft, rhythmic, wet sound. It was a repetitive motion that had no business existing in a store filled with children and glitter. I didn't want to look, but my eyes betrayed me. Out of the corner of my vision, I saw the fabric of his hoodie moving in a slow, deliberate cadence. My throat went bone dry, and my legs felt like they had been bolted to the floor, heavy and useless. My brain screamed at my body to move, but I was paralyzed by a sickening, leaden weight. He wasn't even looking at me directly anymore, he was staring at the jewelry rack with that same hollow smile, but every few seconds, his eyes would flick back to me, checking, watching, feeding on the realization that I knew exactly what he was doing. I straightened up abruptly, fumbling to hang the earrings back on the hook, my hands shaking so violently the plastic rattled against the metal. I turned to Jessa, my voice a jagged, barely audible thread. "Jess." She caught one look at my face and her expression curdled. "What?" I leaned in, my heart hammering against my ribs. "There's something wrong. We need to move." She followed my gaze, her entire body stiffening as the reality hit her. "Oh," she said, her voice dropping into a low, sharp hiss. "Oh, hell no. He's been behind you this whole time." I just nodded, unable to find more words. "He's following you," she said, her tone shifting from concern to a protective, defensive edge. "That's not an accident." We moved in a tight formation toward the back of the store, trying to maintain the illusion of being normal shoppers while my pulse thundered in my ears. I could feel him behind us, a dark, heavy presence that mimicked every step and every shift, like a shadow that refused to detach. Jessa leaned in, her eyes darting around the small space. "Okay. Cameras, counter, employees. We go there." We stopped at a display of hair accessories, pointing at random, glittery things as a distraction. "Oh my God, remember when these were cool?" Jessa said loudly, brandishing a sparkly headband. I forced a laugh, but it sounded like a sob. Behind us, I heard his footsteps stop, then restart, moving closer. That's when I saw her, the young woman behind the counter. She had her hair pulled back in a tight bun and eyes that were scanning the store with a veteran's precision. Her gaze locked on him, then shifted to our terrified faces, and then settled back on him with a look of cold, immediate recognition. She stepped out from behind the counter, her movements deliberate as she positioned herself as a human shield between us and the man. "Sir," she said, her voice a model of controlled calm. "Do you know them?" He didn't speak. His eyes didn't even flicker toward her, they remained anchored to mine. "Sir," she repeated, firmer this time. "Are they your friends?" Slowly, with a chilling lack of emotion, he shook his head. Her jaw tightened, her professional mask hardening into something more protective. I need you to leave the store. Now. For a heartbeat, the air in the cramped shop felt like it was about to ignite. I was certain he would lung, but then he simply turned and walked out, disappearing into the flow of the mall. The second he crossed the threshold, my knees buckled. Oh my God, Jessa breathed, clutching my arm. Did that just happen? I could only nod, my throat too tight to respond. The sales associate stayed close, her eyes never leaving the entrance. You okay? She asked softly. I managed a week, I think so, and a thank you, but the world still felt like it was spinning. We hovered near the register, trying to reclaim our breath, trying to tell ourselves that the nightmare was behind us and that we were safe in the bright light of the mall. We were wrong. A minute passed, then another. Driven by a morbid instinct, I turned toward the front of the store, and froze. He was there. He was standing inches from the glass storefront, his nose almost touching the window, staring directly at me. The smile was gone. What had replaced it was a look of raw, predatory focus, intent and hungry. It was the look of someone who no longer saw a person, but an object he intended to own. Jessa, I whispered, the air leaving my lungs. He's still here. She looked, and the color drained from her face. For a few agonizing seconds, the entire mall disappeared. The upbeat Christmas carols, the chatter of shoppers, the distant sounds of the food court, it all vanished, drowned out by the deafening, frantic thud of my own heart. He didn't blink or shift, he just stood there, inches from the glass, staring straight through me. It felt targeted, intentional, and deeply personal. I gripped Jessa's wrist so hard she hissed in pain. He's watching me, I whispered, my voice trembling. He's not even pretending anymore. I know, she replied, her voice tight with a fear that mirrored my own. I see it. The sales associate followed our gaze and immediately went rigid. Okay, she said, her tone low and authoritative. Do not leave the store. She grabbed the phone behind the counter, turning her back slightly, but I could hear every word. Yeah, this is Claire's by the East Wing. We need security. Now. A wave of relief crashed into me, immediately followed by a fresh surge of terror. Someone finally believed us, but the "what next" felt like a looming shadow. The next few minutes stretched into an eternity. The man remained exactly where he was, tracking my every movement through the glass. When I shifted left, his eyes followed with a sickening fluidity. When I stepped closer to Jessa, his head tilted slightly, as if he were recalculating his plan. At one point, he raised his hand and pressed it flat against the glass, a slow, possessive gesture that felt like he was claiming me. I had never seen that expression in another human being's eyes before. It wasn't anger or even lust, it was something much colder. It was predatory. He's stalking you, Jessa whispered. Thanks, I muttered, my sarcasm a thin shield for my panic. That really helps. She squeezed my hand hard. We're not leaving you alone. Not for a second. I nodded, my breath coming in shallow hitches. Eventually, an older man in a faded security jacket appeared at the entrance. He looked thin and hunched, carrying the weary air of someone who had seen too many minor mall disputes. What seems to be the problem? He asked, his voice flat. The sales associate stepped up immediately, explaining the stalking, the harassment, and the way he refused to leave the window. I added the details, my voice shaking despite my desperate attempt to sound composed. The security officer sighed, adjusted his belt, and glanced toward the mall corridor. The man was gone. The officer shrugged. Well, he said, the indifference in his voice cutting deeper than the cold outside. He's not here now. I stared at him, incredulous. That's it? He just spread his hands with a weary indifference. If he comes back, let me know. That was the extent of it. No report, no escort, no concern. I felt something inside my chest crack. The sales associate looked absolutely furious. She turned to us with a sharp nod. I'll walk you out. We didn't argue. We clung to the walls, moving with a jagged speed, our eyes darting toward every reflection in the glass storefronts. Every pillar felt like a hiding spot, every corner a potential ambush. But we finally reached the exit, and the freezing air hit my face like a physical slap. The parking lot felt terrifyingly huge and exposed. We speed-walked to my car, lunged inside, and slammed the locks shut instantly. I sat there, my hands white-knuckled on the steering wheel, staring into the middle distance. Jessa let out a shaky, jagged exhale. What the hell was that? I whispered back that I didn't know, but I never wanted to feel that way again. That night, the fear turned into a cold, hard anger. I told my boyfriend everything, and together we called mall management, filing complaints and demanding answers. They brushed us off with practiced ease. One person even suggested the man might have had a disability and had simply wandered off without supervision. Maybe. Maybe not. But I know what I felt. He knew exactly what he was doing. He reacted to questions, he followed with deliberate intent, and he targeted me in a crowded mall in the middle of a Tuesday, surrounded by glittery earrings and festive decorations. I wasn't alone, and it still happened. I used to think danger was something that announced itself, something that lived in dark alleys, empty streets, and late nights. I was wrong. Sometimes it happens under harsh fluorescent lights, between fake snowflakes, while upbeat Christmas music plays overhead. Trust your instincts. Never prioritize being polite over being safe. And never, ever assume you're protected just because you're in public. I was 18 years old when my idea of safety finally broke. Not just cracked, not just bent, shattered. Before that Christmas, I honestly believed that bad things were something that only happened to other people. Those were the kinds of stories you see on the news or read late at night. I never thought those stories could crawl into your life and sit outside your bedroom window, breathing on the glass. Back then, my world felt safe. We lived in a quiet, snowy suburb in Ontario. Every house looked the same, and the winter was always very cold. I had just finished high school. I didn't have big plans yet. The most important person in my life was my little brother, Noah. He was 11 years old and very smart. He was also brave and curious. He followed me everywhere. If I went outside, he was right behind me. Our parents said we were a package deal. I was very protective of him because he was such a kind person. We also had our dog, Briggs. He was a big German shepherd. He wasn't mean, but he was very serious, especially when he was with Noah. If Briggs didn't like someone, he let us know. That Christmas, my parents wanted to do something different. They were tired of phones and busy schedules. My dad wanted to go somewhere quiet. They booked a cabin in a place called Hollow Creek Reserve. There was no cell phone service and no towns nearby. It was just deep woods, a river, and old roads covered in snow. I remember sitting at the kitchen table while Dad told us about the trip. Noah was so excited he was bouncing in his chair. "Are there wolves?" Noah asked. "Probably not," Dad said. "Probably," Noah replied with a big grin. Mom looked at him and said, "There are deer and snow and peace." I didn't say much. My stomach felt a little tight, like I was nervous, but I ignored it. I didn't want to ruin the fun. We left on Christmas Eve around 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Dad's truck was full of presents, food, winter clothes, and wood for the fire. Noah and I sat in the back seat, sharing headphones and laughing. Briggs the dog lay on the floor between us. As we drove, the world became empty. The gas stations and houses disappeared. The snow got deeper. We stopped quickly in a tiny town called Milford to meet my aunt and uncle. Everyone was in a hurry because it was so cold. Dad gave them directions, and then we kept going. Soon, there were only trees. The tall, dark pines looked like they were leaning over the road. The snow was piled high on both sides. We reached Hollow Creek just as the sun was going down. The cabins were spread out and hidden by trees. Our cabin was near a river. You could hear the water moving under the ice, which felt a little scary. Inside, the cabin was warm but very old. The floors made loud noises when we walked, and the windows shook in the wind. The air inside smelled like pine cleaner and something damp. Dad started a fire in the fireplace, and Mom cooked dinner while Noah and I unpacked. We did normal things like playing cards and opening a few small gifts. We laughed and took photos. Later, Dad said he was going hunting at sunrise. He looked at me and said, "I'll take you with me." Noah asked if he could come too, and Dad said he could watch and learn. By 10 p.m., we were very tired. Noah and I shared a bedroom in the back of the cabin. It had 2 beds and a window that looked out at the river and the dark woods. Briggs the dog curled up on Noah's bed. Dad brought his hunting bag in and slid it under my bed so he could grab it easily in the morning. I didn't know then that this was the last normal moment we would have. I couldn't sleep well. Every noise in the old cabin felt loud. Every bit of wind sounded like someone walking outside. I saw Noah sleeping and Briggs breathing quietly, but I still felt like something was wrong. Later, I woke up suddenly. It wasn't because of a noise, but because the room felt tense. Briggs was awake. I felt the bed move as he lifted his head. Then he made a low, deep growl. My eyes snapped open. I thought maybe it was just Dad walking around, but the cabin was pitch black. There were no lights on and no sounds from the kitchen. "Briggs, it's okay," I whispered. But he didn't stop. Noah woke up and asked what was wrong. "Nothing," I told him. "Go back to sleep." Briggs stood up, his claws clicking on the floor. He was staring at the window, and his whole body was stiff. Then, he started barking very loudly. Noah jumped up, scared. Before I could say anything, the door flew open and the light turned on. Dad was standing there, and his face looked very strange. He didn't look scared, he looked like he was ready for a fight. He looked like someone who had already been scared and was trying to hide it. "Were you two laughing just now?" he asked. "No," I said right away. "We were sleeping." He didn't say anything back. He walked slowly toward the window and pulled the curtain to the side. Bright moonlight filled the room. "What do you see?" Noah asked. Dad didn't answer. He just leaned close to the glass, looking at the dark trees across the river. Everything was quiet and black. After a few seconds, he let the curtain fall. "Nothing," he said. "I just thought I heard something." He turned off the light and left. Noah looked at me in the dark. "That was weird." "Yeah," I said. "It was probably just an animal." But my heart was beating fast. Dad didn't usually act like that. I couldn't sleep after that. Every little sound made me jump. Around 4 a.m., I finally fell into a light sleep. I woke up to a sound that made my blood run cold. Crunch, crunch, crunch. Someone was walking slowly in the snow right outside our window. They weren't running or lost. They were walking with a purpose. I stayed frozen in bed, barely breathing. The footsteps stopped right under the window. Then, I heard a soft tap on the glass, like fingertips. I closed my eyes tight. Briggs stood up and let out a scary, deep growl. The tapping happened again, louder this time. Then, a voice spoke. It was low, rough, and way too calm. "I know you're awake, little man," the voice said. I couldn't move a muscle. Noah made a small, scared noise next to me. "Why don't you come outside?" the voice whispered through the glass. "I won't hurt you." That was when my instincts took over. I rolled out of bed and reached underneath it. My fingers curled around the cold metal of my dad's rifle. My hands were shaking so much I thought I would drop it. I pulled the curtain back. The man standing there did not look like he belonged anywhere near us. He looked old, maybe in his late 50s. His hair was long, messy, and dirty. He wore many layers of old, torn clothes. His face was only inches away from the glass. He was staring straight at Noah's bed. "Step away from the window," I yelled. My voice was shaking. "Now." He tilted his head and smiled. It was a slow, scary smile. Behind me, Briggs went wild. He barked louder than I had ever heard. He showed his teeth and slammed his body against the door, trying to get to the man. The lights in the cabin snapped on. Mom screamed from the hallway. Dad's voice boomed, "Get away from my house." The man did not run away at first. He leaned closer to the window. His breath made a fog on the glass, and he laughed quietly to himself. Then Dad shouted, "The police are coming." That finally worked. The man turned and ran into the trees. We could hear his feet crunching loudly in the snow and branches breaking as he left. The police arrived a few minutes later. Their red and blue lights shone through the dark forest. They caught the man near the river. He was cold and confused, and he was singing nursery rhymes to himself. The police lights made the woods look strange. The red and blue colors moved across the snow. Inside the cabin, Mom held Noah tightly. He was shaking very hard. Briggs stayed right next to him, growling whenever anyone walked past the window. A police officer knocked on the door and stepped inside. "You are all safe now," he said in a calm voice. "We've got him," the officer said. But I didn't feel safe. Not really. Dad stood by the door, his hands squeezed into fists so tight his knuckles were white. He looked much older than he did just 12 hours ago. One of the officers asked me to explain what happened. I told him everything, the tapping on the glass, the low voice, and exactly where the man was standing. When I mentioned that the man had been talking specifically to my little brother, the officer's face changed just a little. I could tell he was worried. The police took our statements and walked around the outside of the cabin with flashlights. One officer asked Dad how long we had been there. "First night," Dad said. The officer nodded and told us the man had been in the area for a while. "How long is a while?" I asked. The officer waited a second before answering. "Years." That word felt like ice in my chest. They told us later that the man was homeless and had been living deep in the forest for a long time, hiding in old hunting shacks. People nearby had seen him before, but he always disappeared. "What was he doing here?" Mom asked, her voice shaking. The officer just said the man was very sick and had fixations. He became obsessed with things. I looked at Noah, who was hiding his face in Mom's jacket. After the police left, the cabin felt wrong, like it was poisoned. No one even tried to go back to sleep. We packed our things in silence. Dad called my aunt and uncle, and soon we were loading the truck again, our headlights cutting through the falling snow. We spent the rest of the night at my aunt's cabin. Noah and I slept on the couches while the adults whispered in the kitchen. No one laughed. Christmas morning came, but it felt empty. The adults tried to act normal with coffee and breakfast, but it didn't work. Noah flinched every time a door opened. We left the woods early the next day. The drive home was very quiet as the trees turned back into houses and streets. I thought that would be the end of the story. I was wrong. Weeks later, Dad and I were sitting at our kitchen table at home. It was late at night and very quiet. "I need to tell you something," Dad said. I knew what he was going to say before he even finished. "I heard him earlier," Dad continued. "Before he went to your window." My stomach dropped. "I was awake," Dad said. "Around 2 in the morning, I heard someone singing." "What kind of singing?" I asked, though I already knew. "Nursery rhymes," Dad whispered. He was right outside my bedroom window, laughing and talking to himself. "Why didn't you wake us up?" I asked. My voice was loud and sharp. Dad swallowed hard. "I didn't want to scare you. I looked outside but didn't see anything." "So, you left the gun under my bed?" I said quietly. He nodded. "I figured if anything happened," he said, "you would protect your brother." The weight of those words felt very heavy. I was only 18. I shouldn't have had to be ready for something like that. But I was ready, and that scares me more than the man in the woods. Noah says he doesn't remember everything. But sometimes late at night, I hear him lock his bedroom window twice. Even though he is older now, he still asks if Briggs can sleep in his room. As for me, I don't like silence anymore. I don't like the woods. Every Christmas Eve, I listen very carefully. I'm always checking to see if someone is standing outside, breathing against the glass. People think fear goes away over time. They think your body forgets. They think fear is always loud, like screaming or having a nightmare. For me, fear became quiet. It became a habit. I lock doors without thinking. I check windows even in safe places. I hate thin curtains, and I never sleep on the first floor if I can help it. I always sleep facing the door, and I always make sure the dog is nearby. Noah changed, too. For a long time, he needed a nightlight again. He stopped wanting to go camping. When kids at school tell scary stories about the woods, he just goes quiet. Once, when Noah was about 14, he asked me something out of nowhere. "Do you think he remembers us?" I didn't have to ask who he meant. "I don't think so," I said, but I wasn't sure if that was true. Life moved on. I went to school and work, and Christmas started to feel almost normal again. But every December, when the air got cold and the nights got long, the memory came back. I could still hear the tapping and the voice. I still remembered how the man didn't look surprised when he saw me holding a rifle. A few years later, Dad told me something else. The man wasn't just picking cabins by accident. He had been watching families and listening for the sound of children. Knowing that made the memory even worse. I think about how close we came to something terrible. A curtain, a dog, and a moment of courage changed everything. It could have gone so differently. I don't think I am brave. I only acted because I had to. Real fear doesn't give you time to think or plan. It just happens, and you have to react. Noah is a man now. He is taller and stronger than me. He doesn't remember the man's face, but he remembers how that night felt. We don't talk about it much because we don't need to. Every Christmas Eve, no matter where we are, we send each other a text message before bed. "You good?" "Yeah." "You?" "Yeah." That is enough for us. Some places are not meant for families. Some forests remember people for a long time. And some nights follow you for the rest of your life. They follow you quietly, like footsteps in the snow, waiting just outside your window. I was 7 years old the last year I believed in Santa Claus. I know that sounds like a cliché way to start a story. But when you are a kid in a quiet town like Ashford Ridge, Ohio, Christmas is more than just a holiday. It is a whole season. It smells like pine needles and sugar cookies. It feels like magic is something you could actually touch if you stayed up late enough. My parents, Rick and Laura, weren't rich. My dad worked at a paper mill, and my mom worked at a diner. But every December, they made sure Christmas felt big. We lived on a quiet street where everyone knew everyone else. Our house had a sliding glass door that opened into the basement. That detail matters more than it should. Christmas Eve that year was normal. My mom made meatloaf. My dad watched a movie on TV. I fell asleep on the couch holding my stuffed dog, Ranger. My dad carried me up to bed. That was the last normal thing I remember. I woke up later because I was very thirsty. My throat was dry, and I knew I couldn't go back to sleep until I got some water. I sat up and listened. The house was very quiet. There was no TV and no footsteps. I could only hear the clock ticking and the heater turning on. I walked down the hallway without any shoes on. The carpet felt cold. We always left night lights on in the living room and kitchen because my mom hated the dark. My mom said night lights made the house feel less empty. I grabbed a cup, filled it with water, and looked out the window at the slow, quiet snow. That's when I heard a sound from downstairs. It wasn't talking, it sounded like someone was crinkling a thick plastic trash bag. I froze. Our tree was down in the basement near the glass door. I thought it might be my mom. Mom? I whispered. No one answered. I walked halfway down the stairs and a lamp clicked on. There he was. A man was standing next to the tree. He was huge with very wide shoulders. He wore a red suit, but it looked old and dirty. His beard was long, white, and messy. He turned toward me. Well, hey there, buddy, he said in a deep, rough voice. Because of the suit and the beard, I thought he was Santa Claus. I wasn't scared, I was excited. I thought you weren't real, I said. He laughed and told me to come closer. He smelled like cold air and metal. He patted my head with his rough hand and asked if I had been a good kid. He pointed to a large black bag on the floor. It was full of stuff. I saw that some of our presents were missing from under the tree, but I was only 7, so I didn't think it was strange. He told me I needed to go back to bed. I want to watch, I said. He stopped smiling and said firmly, no. You need to go. He walked me to the stairs and asked which room was mine. I told him it was the blue one. As I walked up, he watched me. When I got to the top, the lights went out. The whole house was dark. I got into bed, my heart racing. Just as I pulled up my covers, bang. A loud crashing sound of breaking glass and metal echoed through the house. I squeezed my eyes shut and tried to tell myself it was just Santa leaving. Morning came quickly. I woke up to the sound of my mom screaming. Her voice sounded panicked and scared. I ran downstairs and stopped at the basement door. The tree was still there, but everything else was wrong. The presents were gone, every single one of them. The sliding glass door was broken. It had been pushed off its track so hard that the frame was bent. Snow had blown inside and was melting on the carpet. My dad was standing there, looking very pale, holding a phone to his ear. I saw Santa, I said. The room went completely silent. Both of my parents turned to look at me. What did you say? My mom whispered. I told them everything. I told them about the man, the big black bag, and how he whispered to me. My dad's face got very hard and serious. He turned away and started talking quietly into the phone. Years later, my dad told me what happened. The police said 2 other families called that same morning with the same story. It was a man dressed as Santa. He looked for sliding doors and stole everything from under the trees. That was the year my parents told me the truth. Not just the truth about Santa, but about locks, strangers, and how monsters don't always hide under the bed. Sometimes they wear red suits and wait for kids to believe in them. I never wanted to be a night security guard. I took the job when my life was going nowhere and I just needed money. I was in my late 20s and living on my cousin's couch. I told myself the job was temporary. That is how I ended up working the night shift at Northgate Galleria. It was a huge mall. At night, it felt too big and too empty. Your voice would echo even if you whispered. Most nights were boring. I just walked around, checked doors, and drank bad coffee. The hardest part was staying awake while the rest of the world slept. Shadows looked deeper, and every sound felt louder. By December, I had worked there for a year. Christmas Eve was on a Tuesday. I hoped I would get the night off, but I didn't. While everyone else was home with family, I started my shift at 10:58 p.m. The mall felt like a giant tomb decorated for a party. There was fake snow on the railings and huge ornaments hanging from the ceiling. In the middle of the mall stood a giant Christmas tree, 30 feet tall. It was covered in bright lights. The mall stayed lit at night for security, but the holiday lights made it feel creepy. It was like the building was pretending to be alive. Lucky me, I said to myself as I signed the log book. I started my walk. My boots made a squeaking sound on the floor. All the stores were locked behind metal gates. The mannequins in the windows looked like they were frozen, wearing sweaters that were on sale. At 12:30 a.m., I got a cup of coffee. It tasted burnt and bitter, but it kept me awake. I sat on a bench near the big tree. From there, I could see 3 different hallways. The tree made me feel a little less lonely. But then, I saw a light. I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. Far down the west hallway, inside a small jewelry store, I saw a faint glow. It was a small shop that sold rings and chains. I frowned and stood up. The light had definitely been off before. No way, I whispered. No cleaners or workers were supposed to be there. At night, I was the only person in the entire mall. I started walking toward the store. My radio made a quiet clicking sound on my belt. I told myself it was probably just a timer, but I had to check. The mall felt huge. A soft, creepy version of Silent Night was playing over the speakers. When I got to the store, I checked the door. It was locked tight. Then, the light inside flickered once, then twice. A scary feeling crawled up my back. "Hello?" I yelled, tapping on the glass. "Mall security." No one answered. I leaned down to put my coffee on the floor. When I looked up, I froze. Behind the counter, I saw the top of a head with dark hair. It wasn't a doll or a reflection. It was a person hiding. "Hey!" I barked. "You can't be in here." Suddenly, the lights went out. It was pitch black. My heart beat so hard it actually hurt. Then the lights flickered back on. The space behind the counter was empty. There was no one there. "You're just tired," I whispered to myself. I tried to find my keys, but I realized I didn't want to go in there alone. "Nope," I said. I backed away and walked back toward the big Christmas tree. My hands were shaking as I took a drink of my coffee. It was so hot it burned my throat. Then, I heard a loud click behind me. Then, bang. It sounded like a gunshot echoing through the mall. I spun around. I saw someone running at the far end of the hallway. They disappeared into a side path near the bathrooms and the emergency exits. "Oh, no," I said. My heart was racing. I started running as fast as I could. When I reached the hallway, it was silent again. This part of the mall was creepy. It had massage chairs and small rides for kids. There was nowhere for the person to go. The exit doors were locked and had alarms. They were trapped. I stopped in front of the men's bathroom, breathing hard. "All right," I called out. I tried to sound brave. "This is security. You need to come out now." No one answered. I opened the door just a little bit. That's when I heard it, the sound of someone crying. It was a low, broken sound. It didn't even sound human. My stomach dropped. "Sir," I said. "If you are in here, you need to talk to me." The crying didn't stop. It echoed off the walls. I pushed the door all the way open. The sound was coming from the very last stall. "I'm calling the police," I warned. "Last chance." Nothing changed. I knelt down slowly. My heart was pounding in my ears. I looked under the stall door. I saw two black shoes facing me. Whoever was in there was standing perfectly still, facing the door, just crying. Then the crying stopped. Suddenly, the person dropped to their knees and looked back at me from under the door. We were face to face. It was the same man with the same dead eyes. I scrambled backward and almost fell over. "Nope, nope, nope," I said. I stood up and ran out of the bathroom. My hands were shaking as I called 911. When the police got there, they moved fast. They kicked in the stall door and dragged the man out. As they walked him past me, he turned his head slowly. He looked me right in the eyes and said my name perfectly. I never told anyone that part. I finished my shift in silence. I never worked another Christmas Eve again. I still think about his eyes sometimes. He had a hollow look, like he had already decided how I was going to die. I was never big on traditions, but there was one thing I always did. Every Christmas Eve, I went to my friend Evan's house. It didn't matter how old we were or where we lived the rest of the year. Christmas Eve was our special night. We played board games, had silly arguments, and ate too much junk food. His mom always made us eat more even when we were full. At midnight, everything felt quiet and still, like the whole world had stopped. We grew up in a rural part of Pennsylvania. It was the kind of place where the towns were hidden in deep forests and the roads didn't even have names. Evan lived about 15 minutes away from me, deep in the woods. There were no street lights and no cell phone service. We were in our mid-20s now. We had jobs and stress, but Christmas Eve was our time to forget about our problems. It had been a hard year for both of us, so we just wanted to relax. Snow had been falling all day. It was the quiet kind of snow that makes everything sound muffled. By 10 p.m., the yard was completely white. "This is the last year we're doing this sober," Evan joked, opening a drink. I laughed because he said that every year. We were sitting on the floor with a game between us. His dad was in bed, and his mom was asleep in a chair with a movie playing quietly. By 11:30 p.m. I knew I shouldn't drive. The roads were icy and I didn't feel safe. "I'll call a ride," I said, looking at my phone. Evan shook his head. "No way. It's Christmas Eve. I'll drive you." "Are you sure?" I asked. He grabbed his keys. "I drive these roads all the time. You'll be fine." I felt a little nervous for a second, and I really wish I had listened to that feeling. We got into his truck. The heater was cold, and the snow crunched under the tires. The radio was mostly static. The road was very narrow with only 2 lanes and no place to pull over. The trees pressed in on both sides like walls. The snow reflected the headlights, which made the woods behind the trees look even darker. We didn't talk much. It was just a calm, quiet drive. "Remember when we used to go sledding down Miller's Hill?" Evan asked suddenly. "Yeah," I laughed. And your cousin broke his arm. He deserved it, Evan joked. The sound of our laughter felt too loud in the quiet truck. A few minutes later, something moved fast and low to the ground. Evan slammed on the brakes. The truck slid a little bit before stopping. "What was that?" he asked. My heart started pounding. "A deer, probably," I said, but he didn't look like he believed me. The road ahead was empty. "Turn on the bright lights," I told him. He did, and the forest lit up with bright white patches and long shadows. "I'll go check," I said. I started to open the door. "Dude, don't," Evan said. "It's fine." "It's probably nothing," I replied. I don't know why I got out. Maybe it was because I had been on that road 100 times and felt safe. The cold air hit me hard and burned my lungs. I walked toward where I saw the movement and stopped. There were footprints in the snow. They were human boot prints, and they were fresh. "No," I whispered. I watched as the tracks crossed the road and went into the trees. Suddenly, Evan honked the horn as loud as he could. I jumped, and my chest felt tight. I turned back toward the truck. Evan was leaning forward, gripping the steering wheel and holding the horn down. "What are you doing?" I started to ask. He didn't look at the road, he pointed into the woods. I looked where he was pointing and saw him. A man was standing perfectly still between the trees about 40 feet away. He was thin with dark hair. He was only wearing a t-shirt and jeans, no jacket or gloves in the freezing snow. His shirt had dark stains on it. Behind him, he was holding a black trash bag that looked full of something heavy. He didn't look at us. He just stared at the ground. I ran back to the truck and slammed the door shut. "Go!" I yelled. "Go!" Evan didn't argue. He drove away fast. As we passed him, the man didn't move at all. The man didn't chase us. He didn't even look up. He just stood there like we weren't even real. We didn't say a word until we got to my house. Evan turned off the truck and sat there, breathing hard. "I thought he was going to get you," Evan finally said. "What?" I asked. "When you were out there in the snow," Evan's voice was shaking. "He was moving toward you. Very slowly. He was heading straight for you." My stomach dropped. "That's why I hit the horn," Evan continued. "When I did that, he just froze. We called the police and told them everything. They went out to look, but they found nothing. There was no man, no bag, and no footprints. The falling snow had covered everything up." Evan stayed at my house that night. Neither of us slept at all. To this day, we never use that road after it gets dark. Some traditions are not worth keeping. I didn't think the fear would stay with me, but it did. People don't tell you that about scary moments. You think that once you're home with the doors locked, the fear will go away. You think you'll just call it a weird night and forget it. But fear doesn't work like that. It stays with you. That night, Evan slept on the couch. My parents were already asleep. They had no idea anything scary had happened. I didn't wake them up. I think I was afraid that if I said it out loud, it would make it even more real. I stayed in my room, staring at the ceiling. I listened to the wind pushing snow against the house. Every little noise sounded wrong. Around 3 o'clock in the morning, I thought I heard footsteps outside. I sat up fast and held my breath. I listened as hard as I could, but it was just the heater turning on. I didn't sleep a wink. The police called the next afternoon. They looked at the area again after the snow stopped. They checked the nearby cabins and talked to the neighbors. There were no reports of missing people or anyone acting strange. One officer told me, it was probably just someone walking through the woods to dump some trash. Trash. I didn't argue with him, but I knew what I saw. I knew exactly what a trash bag looked like. Evan and I didn't talk about it much after that. It wasn't because we didn't want to, but because we always ended up stuck on the same detail, the clothes. Neither of us could understand it. Who wears just a t-shirt in that kind of cold? And why stand perfectly still when a truck drives by? Weeks went by and life moved on. Work and bills kept us busy. The snow turned to slush and then melted away completely. But that road stayed empty. It felt too empty. One night in February, Evan called me. "Hey," he said. "Do you ever look up police reports?" "For what?" I asked. "There was a guy arrested 2 counties away," he said. "A domestic situation. It took the police days to find him." I gripped my phone tighter. "Why are you telling me this?" "They said he hid in the woods for almost a week," Evan continued. "In the middle of winter." I didn't say anything. "The guy was wearing jeans and a t-shirt when they found him," Evan added quietly. Silence hung between us for a long time. "It doesn't mean it was him," I finally said. "I know," Evan replied. "But I don't think I'll ever stop thinking about it." Neither would I. The last time I went down that road was the following Christmas. I didn't mean to, but a detour and a GPS reroute sent me that way. It was early evening and still light out. Snow had just started falling again. As I drove, I felt my chest get tight. The bend in the road came into view. The exact spot. I slowed down. There, just off the side of the road and half buried in the snow, was something black. It was a torn garbage bag. It was empty and split open, looking like it had been dragged. I didn't stop. I didn't even look twice. I just kept driving. Some things don't want to be remembered. And some roads remember you. I was 26 that Christmas. To be honest, I already knew weeks in advance that I'd be spending it alone. That wasn't new for me. I lived in a small rented house in the hills outside a dying coal town in southern Appalachia. It wasn't the kind of place you'd find on a map unless you were looking for trouble or trying to disappear. One gas station, one diner that closed by 6 o'clock, and cell service that vanished if the weather turned bad. Most of my coworkers lived closer to the highway, but I preferred the quiet. Or, at least, I thought I did. My family was scattered all over Arizona, Oregon, and one cousin in Florida who only called when he was broke. Flights cost too much, and my job as a power contractor didn't stop for the holidays. I was the guy who kept the lights on for everyone else while I missed out on dinner and sleep. Christmas Eve was just another shift. I clocked out after 7 p.m. into a sky that was already pitch black. The cold felt personal, like it was biting at me on purpose. On the drive home, the radio DJ was wishing everyone a Merry Christmas. I turned him off halfway through the sentence. The house was dark when I pulled in, and the porch light was flickering again. I made a mental note to fix it later. The wind blew dry leaves across the gravel, and the sound was louder than it should have been. Inside, the house smelled like cold wood and dust. I didn't have a tree or decorations. It was just me, the hum of the fridge, and the wind in the trees. I ate some leftover chili standing up at the counter. I didn't even turn on the TV. I was bone tired, that kind of tired where your body just demands sleep. By 8:30, I was heading downstairs. My bedroom was in the basement because the rent was cheaper and it was quieter. I locked the door out of habit, tossed my phone on the nightstand, and fell onto the bed without even changing my clothes. I fell asleep instantly. The sound that woke me didn't make sense at first. It bled into my dream, a soft, rhythmic thumping that didn't belong. I opened my eyes and stared at the low basement ceiling, my heart already racing. I tried to tell myself it was just the house settling or the pipes knocking in the cold, but then I heard it again. Clear as day. Footsteps were coming from directly above me. I sat up slowly, holding my breath. Since my bedroom was in the basement, any movement on the main floor echoed right through the vents. These weren't the normal creaks of an old house, these were deliberate, heavy steps. Someone was walking through my home. My first thought was confusion, not fear. My friend Caleb sometimes crashed at my place after a night out because it was closer to the city, and he had a spare key. But he always texted first. I grabbed my phone. Nothing. No missed calls, no messages. I stood up and moved quietly toward the stairs. My heart thudded harder with every step. Caleb. I called out, keeping my voice low but firm. Man, is that you? Silence. Then, suddenly, running. Heavy, panicked footsteps tore across the floor above me. They were fast and erratic. This wasn't the stumble of a drunk friend, it was the sprint of someone desperate. Whoever it was ran from one end of the house to the other. Every instinct I had screamed at once. I didn't think, I just reacted. I ducked under the staircase, pulled open the narrow crawl space door, and squeezed inside just as footsteps slammed down the basement stairs. The sound was too close. I curled into a ball, pressing my hand over my mouth to quiet my breathing, as I heard boots hit the basement floor right outside my hiding spot. Drawers were yanked open. Furniture scraped across the concrete floor. The couch tipped over and hit the floor with a loud thud. Whoever it was wasn't stealing, they were searching for something. I could hear his breathing now, fast and angry. A man's voice muttered under his breath, his words sharp with frustration. Where the hell did you go? My stomach dropped. He knew I was there. Something crashed into the wall. A closet door splintered. Metal clanged as tools spilled from my workbench and scattered across the floor. I couldn't stop shaking. Every breath I took felt way too loud. My chest burned from trying to hold it in. I thought about my phone sitting uselessly on the nightstand. I thought about how stupid it was that I hadn't installed security cameras. I realized that this is how people disappear. In quiet houses, with no witnesses and bad luck. Then, he screamed. It wasn't a scream of pain, it was pure rage. The sound echoed through the basement, raw and animal-like. Then, I heard his footsteps pounding back up the stairs. I stayed frozen long after the house went quiet. Minutes turned into hours. Every little noise made my pulse race, the wind, the tick of the heater, or something falling upstairs that had been knocked loose earlier. I didn't move until the silence lasted so long it felt unreal. When I finally crawled out of the crawl space, my legs almost gave out under me. The basement looked like a storm had hit it. Nothing was stolen, and nothing had been carefully searched. It was just chaos and desperation. I grabbed my phone, my hands shaking so badly I almost dropped it, and locked myself back into the crawl space before dialing 911. The operator's voice helped me stay calm. Stay where you are, she said. Officers are on the way. Those 20 minutes felt longer than the rest of the night combined. When the police finally arrived, I came out slowly with my hands raised. My voice was barely steady enough to explain what had happened. They searched the house from top to bottom, but no one was there. The back sliding door was halfway open, and the glass was warped where it had been pried apart. Nothing was missing. One officer shook his head quietly. You're lucky, he said. Whoever this was, they weren't here for your stuff. I didn't sleep in that house again that night, and I never slept the same way ever again. I stayed there for one more year, but nothing else happened, no break-ins, no signs, no answers. But every Christmas Eve after that, when the house went quiet, I still listened. I knew exactly what those footsteps sounded like, and I knew how close I had come to being found. I was 19 that winter when I learned how thin the line is between a normal night and something that follows you forever. I didn't grow up thinking about danger. My town, Red Hollow, was a place people passed through without even remembering its name. It had one main road, a diner, a hardware store, and a small movie theater that had somehow survived for years. Everyone knew each other. If something bad happened, it was usually just an accident or a small family argument. That sense of safety was a part of me. It's probably why I took the job at the theater in the first place. I needed money for college and gas, and the Cedar Ridge Cinema was hiring. It was minimum wage and free popcorn, easy work. I started there the summer after high school and worked my way up until they trusted me with closing shifts. By December, I had locked that building up alone more times than I could count. Christmas Eve was always weird. People think theaters would be packed, but in Red Hollow, Christmas Eve was for family dinners and church. The cinema stayed open just because of tradition. Management thought selling even a few tickets was better than closing. So, when I saw I was on the schedule for an 8-hour shift, I didn't complain. I knew it would be dead quiet and boring. The drive-in that evening was clear. The sky was a washed-out gray, looking like it might snow. Christmas lights blinked on porches as I drove past the gas station. Everything felt normal and comfortable. I even said out loud, "Easy money." Inside, the theater smelled like butter and stale soda. The lobby lights felt too bright for such an empty place. I clocked in, put on my apron, and stood behind the counter. For the first few hours, it went exactly as I thought. A couple came in arguing about what movie to see. A dad brought his kid to a cartoon and apologized for being there. I smiled, took their tickets, and refilled the popcorn. Around 8 p.m., my coworker left. She waved and said, "Merry Christmas," and reminded me to lock the side door. I laughed and told her I had it covered. By 9:30 p.m., the last movie had started. The lobby was completely empty. I sat on a stool behind the counter, scrolling through messages from my friends. They were all posting pictures of ugly sweaters and family dinners. I felt a little bit lonely, but it wasn't too bad. It was just one of those quiet moments where you realize you are alone while everyone else is together. That's when I noticed the car. From behind the counter, I could see right through the big glass windows into the parking lot. It was mostly empty, except for my old car near the front and one other car parked farther back. It was sitting right at the edge where the lights were dim. At first, I didn't think much of it. Some people sit in their cars until the previews are almost over because they hate the ads. The car's headlights were on, shining straight at the theater. The light hit the glass and made it look like a mirror. I checked the clock, 9:47 p.m., cutting it close, I muttered. I went back to my phone. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. The car didn't move. I looked again, and it was still there. The engine was running, and the headlights stayed steady. A small voice in the back of my head told me something was wrong, but I ignored it. In Red Hollow, you don't learn to be suspicious. You learn to make up excuses. I thought maybe they were having an argument or waiting for someone. By 10:30 p.m., I knew they weren't there for a movie. The last show wouldn't be over until midnight. There was no reason to sit at the back of the lot for over an hour. I stood up and walked closer to the window, trying to see who was inside the car. The glare from the headlights was too bright to see anything. I felt stupid for being scared. I even laughed at myself and told myself to get a grip. The rest of the night moved slowly. I did all my cleaning early, wiping down counters that were already clean and walking around the lobby just to stay busy. Every time I looked out the window, the car was still there. It never moved. Midnight came and went. The last movie ended, and a few people walked out, wishing me a Merry Christmas. None of them noticed how nervous I was. Once the doors closed behind the last person, the theater felt huge and empty. It was so quiet it made my ears ring. I locked the side door and started turning off the lights, but I kept looking back at the window. The car hadn't changed. Same spot, same headlights. My palms were sweaty. I tried to tell myself not to overreact, but my body knew something was wrong. I only had one thing left to do, lock the front doors. To do that, I had to step outside. I stood there for a full minute with my keys in my hand, staring at my reflection in the glass. I thought about my dad and how he always told me to trust my gut feeling. I almost called him just to hear his voice. But instead, I told myself I was being dramatic. "Lock the doors and go home," I whispered. "You're fine." I pushed the door open and stepped into the cold night air. Just as I turned around to lock the door, I heard it. Thud. 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 Car doors. Not one, but three. The sound sent a shock through my body. I spun around and saw the car at the back of the lot. 3 doors were hanging open. 3 dark shapes were stepping out. They didn't say a word. They didn't shout. They just started walking toward me, and they were moving fast. I felt a surge of pure terror. I didn't think, I just acted. I dropped my keys and ran. I could hear heavy footsteps behind me, getting closer and closer. I didn't look back, I was too afraid of what I'd see. I reached my car and fumbled for the handle, my hands shaking so badly I missed it the first time. When I finally yanked the door open and threw myself inside, I locked it just as one of them reached the hood. The sound of his palm hitting the metal still echoes in my head. I started the engine and peeled out, tires screaming against the asphalt. In the rearview mirror, I saw them sprinting back toward their car. My heart was pounding so hard it physically hurt. As I reached the exit of the lot, their car shot up behind me. Their headlights flooded my mirrors. They followed me. Every turn I made, they made. Every stop sign, they rolled through right behind me. My breathing came in sharp, broken gasps. I knew with absolute certainty that if I went home, they would know exactly where I lived. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped my phone when I called my dad. "Dad," I choked out the second he answered. "I need you right now." He didn't ask questions. He just said, "Where are you?" "I'm being followed." "Go to the police station," he said immediately. "Don't stop." "I'm on my way." I drove like I'd never driven before. Red lights didn't matter. Speed limits didn't exist. The other car stayed glued to my bumper the entire time. When the police station finally came into view, it felt like a miracle. The moment I pulled into the lot, the car behind me accelerated, swerved around, and tore past, disappearing into the night. I sat there, hands locked around the steering wheel, shaking uncontrollably. By the time my dad arrived, I was crying so hard I couldn't even speak. On Christmas morning, I called my boss. My voice shook as I told him everything. He didn't interrupt once. When I finished, there was a long silence. Then he said, "You're never closing alone again." I quit a few months later. I still think about those men sometimes. I think about how close they got, and how different things would be if I had dropped my keys a second later or if my car hadn't started right away. Red Hollow still looks the same, quiet and safe. But I know better now. Some nights are just nights, and some nights change you forever. I grew up believing our house was the safest place on earth. It wasn't fancy, just a 2-story home in a quiet neighborhood where people waved while shoveling snow. It was the kind of place where nothing ever happened. My parents bought the house before I was born. Every dent in the wall and every squeaky stair had a memory tied to it. I knew every corner of that house. That is why what happened at Christmas still feels unreal, because fear shouldn't exist in a place you love. My parents had kids very late in life. They had my older brother, Travis, when they were young, and then they had me 6 years later. By the time I was in high school, they were already planning for retirement. Then came Noelle. She was only 2 years old when this happened. People were always confused by her. They thought she was my niece or even my own daughter. "She's my sister," I'd explain, and people would look at me like they couldn't quite believe it. Noelle was born right before Christmas. A massive snowstorm hit that night, and the roads were so dangerous my dad almost didn't make it to the hospital. My mom always said Noelle was wrapped in winter itself. She was tiny, very loud, and curious about everything. Most importantly, she trusted me completely. That is the part that still hurts to think about. That December, I was home from my first semester of college. Being away had been hard and lonely, so coming home felt safe and grounding. My parents, however, were exhausted. Raising a toddler again in their late 40s while working full-time had left them running on fumes. They decided to book a trip to a small cabin in Vermont for 6 nights. "We deserve this," my mom said, sounding both guilty and hopeful. I told them I would take care of Noelle. I really meant it. I wanted to help them. The day my parents left, my mom was incredibly nervous. She checked the locks, the baby monitor, and the stove over and over again. "Are you sure you're okay with this?" she asked, holding onto the car door. I laughed and told her to relax because I had everything under control. She smiled, but I could tell she was still worried. My dad hugged me tighter than usual and told me to call him if anything felt off. I ignored his warning, but I really shouldn't have. The first few days were easy. Noelle followed me everywhere, dragging her stuffed animals behind her. In the evenings, I let her play in the living room while I watched TV. I kept the lights off, leaving only the Christmas tree glowing. I loved how the ornaments caught the light and made the room feel warm and safe. At night, I carried Noelle upstairs, put her in her pajamas, and tucked her into her crib. Her bedroom was connected to my parents' room by a Jack and Jill bathroom, meaning the bathroom sat in the middle with a door leading into each bedroom. It was just a normal part of the house, but that detail became very important later. The night everything changed was very quiet. It was snowing heavily outside, which made the rest of the world feel muffled and far away. Noelle fell asleep early, so I turned on the baby monitor and went downstairs to relax. I felt so peaceful, like nothing bad could ever happen to us. Suddenly, the baby monitor crackled. At first, I thought it was just static. Then the sound changed into a low, warped noise that sounded like someone breathing. I paused my movie and listened closely. It wasn't Noelle crying or moving. It sounded like a voice. My stomach tightened with fear. "Don't be stupid," I told myself. I stood up and stared at the monitor, waiting. Then, the sound stopped completely. It was dead silent. My heart was still racing, but I told myself what everyone says in moments like that: old house, bad signal, you're just tired. I hit play on the movie again, but I couldn't focus. Every little crackle from the monitor made my shoulders tense. Then it happened again. A low, uneven sound pushed through the speaker, not loud, but cautious, like whoever was making it didn't want to be heard. I leaned forward, gripping the edge of the couch. "Hello?" I said quietly, feeling ridiculous for talking to a plastic monitor. The sound shifted. It wasn't random anymore, it had a rhythm. In, out. Breathing. My chest tightened instantly. "Nope," I whispered, already standing up. I took the stairs 2 at a time and pushed Noelle's door open so hard it hit the wall. She jolted awake and started crying, that sharp, panicked cry that slices right through your nerves. "Oh, hey. Hey, I'm sorry," I said quickly, scooping her up. I didn't mean to scare you. Her tiny arms wrapped around my neck, and I could feel her heart pounding against my chest. I scanned the room. The nightlight glowed softly, and the shadows were exactly where they always were. Nothing moved. Nothing was wrong. I rocked her gently until her cries turned into soft sniffles. "It's okay," I whispered. "You're safe. I've got you." She rested her head on my shoulder, and I stayed there for a long time, just listening to the house. When I finally laid her back down, she rolled onto her side and fell back towards sleep. I exhaled slowly. See? Nothing. I stepped back into the hallway, and that's when I noticed the bathroom door. It was cracked open just a few inches. I frowned, a cold chill washing over me. I didn't remember leaving it like that. I nudged the door shut with my foot and went back downstairs. I didn't even make it 10 minutes before the monitor lit up again. This time, it was crying. Real, gut-wrenching crying. I sprinted back up. Noelle was standing in her crib, her face flushed and tears streaking down her cheeks. She wasn't looking at me, she was pointing directly past my shoulder at the bathroom door. It was wide open again. My stomach dropped. "What is it?" I asked softly, crouching down. "What do you see?" She didn't say a word, she just kept pointing, her finger shaking. I turned slowly. The bathroom was pitch black. I reached for the switch and flipped it, but nothing happened. It was empty. The shower curtain was still, and the mirror just showed my own pale face. I forced a smile. "There's nothing there, sweetheart. See? Just the bathroom." She didn't believe me. I picked her up and checked everywhere, behind the door, in the shower, even the closet. Nothing. Still, my skin crawled like I was missing something right in front of me. I stayed with her until she fell back asleep, and before I left, I shut both bathroom doors and made sure the knobs were locked. Downstairs, the living room felt different, too quiet. I turned up the TV just to fill the silence. That's when the monitor crackled again. It wasn't crying this time. It wasn't breathing. It was whispering. A man's voice, low and intimate, right next to the speaker. My blood ran cold. "No," I said out loud, rattling the coffee table as I stood up. I took off for the stairs. Halfway up, Noelle screamed. I burst into the room. She was shaking and crying harder than I had ever heard. Both bathroom doors were now wide open. I froze. The air felt heavy and thick. Then, I saw movement. A shape stepped out from my parents' bedroom, a man, barefoot, wearing a dirty sweatshirt. He looked at me and smiled. That was the moment my body finally reacted. For half a second, my brain refused to understand what I was seeing. A man didn't belong in my parents' bedroom, walking through that bathroom like he owned the place. He didn't belong in our quiet house on a snowy night, smiling at me while my little sister screamed. But he was there. He was real, breathing, and close enough that I could smell him. He looked ordinary, which was the worst part. He looked like he was in his mid-30s, unshaven, with a dark hoodie that was frayed at the sleeves. His hair was greasy, flattened like he'd been wearing a hat for too long. He wasn't rushing or panicking, he was completely calm. That smile never reached his eyes. "Hey," he said softly, like we were just having a casual talk. Didn't mean to wake her. Something inside me snapped. I didn't scream or say a word. I just grabbed Noelle. She shrieked as I yanked her out of the crib, her arms locking around my neck so tight it hurt. I turned and ran. The man took a step forward. "Easy," he said. "You're going to slip." That was the moment fear turned into pure, blinding survival. I bolted. I didn't grab shoes or a coat. I flew down the stairs, gripping Noelle so hard I was afraid I'd hurt her. The hardwood floor was slick under my bare feet, and I nearly fell twice, catching myself on the railing at the last second. Behind me, I heard him moving. He wasn't running, he was walking, slow and steady, like he knew he didn't need to rush. I reached the front door, fumbled with the lock, and yanked it open. The freezing air slammed into me. The snow bit into my bare feet as I sprinted across the lawn, Noelle sobbing into my shoulder. I didn't look back. I ran straight to my neighbor Darlene's house. She was in her 50s and lived alone. She was the kind of person who was always outside and always kept a watchful eye on the neighborhood. Darlene's porch light was on, and I banged on the door like my life depended on it, because it did. "Please," I yelled. "Please open the door." The door flew open. Darlene stood there in her robe, her eyes wide with shock. "Oh my God, what happened?" "There's a man in my house," I said, the words tumbling over each other. "He was in my sister's room. Please call the police." She didn't ask a single question. She grabbed my arm and pulled us inside, locking the door behind us. "You're okay," she said firmly. "You're okay now." She took Noelle from me, cradling her like she'd done it 1,000 times. "I've got her. Go sit down." My hands were shaking so hard I couldn't even stand. I had to sit right there on the floor. Darlene dialed 911, her voice steady as she told the operator there was an intruder next door. The police arrived fast. Red and blue lights painted the snow outside like a nightmare Christmas display. 2 officers took my statement while another pair went to search our house. I told them everything. The monitor, the whispering, the man in the sweatshirt. They exchanged a look that didn't make me feel any better. After searching every room, closet, and crawl space, they found nothing. No forced entry, no broken windows, no signs of a struggle. One officer came back and shook his head. "House is clear," he said. I stared at him. "That's not possible." "He was there. I saw him." "We believe you," he said gently. "But he's gone." When I asked how he got in, the officer hesitated. "Sometimes people leave doors unlocked." I knew I hadn't, but I didn't have the energy to argue. Darlene insisted we stay the night at her place, and I didn't fight her. I didn't sleep a wink. My parents came home early from Vermont, and my mom cried when I told her what happened. My dad checked every lock in the house twice. They called it a break-in or an attempted burglary, something that made sense to them, but nothing about it felt normal to me. 2 weeks later, my mom asked me to put the decorations away. I didn't want to go into the attic. It sounds stupid, but the thought of being alone in any part of that house made my stomach twist. But my mom was in the kitchen and my dad was right outside on the phone. "Can you put the boxes up there?" my mom asked, nodding toward the stack of decorations. "Yeah," I said. "Sure." The attic access was in the hallway ceiling, right outside my parents' bedroom, the same bedroom where I'd seen him. I pulled the string, and the folding ladder creaked down, each step sounding louder than it should have in the quiet house. A draft of stale, dusty air drifted down to meet me. I climbed up with the first box and pushed it onto the plywood floor. At first, everything looked normal: cardboard boxes, old suitcases, and broken lamps we'd always promised to fix. It was just years of family clutter stacked in uneven rows. I set the box down and turned to leave, ready to be done with it. That's when I noticed the far corner. The boxes there weren't piled haphazardly like the rest, they were stacked too deliberately, arranged like a makeshift wall to block the view. My chest tightened. I took a step closer, my pulse beginning to thrum in my ears. Behind those boxes, the space was dark and clear, where the dust should have been inches thick. I pushed one box aside, then another, and my stomach dropped straight through the floor. There was a bed. It wasn't a real mattress, but close enough, layers of heavy blankets piled together. A pillow was pressed flat, clearly used night after night. Next to it were empty food wrappers shoved into a grocery bag and a half-empty water bottle. Someone had been living there. My vision blurred as the realization hit me. He hadn't broken in that night. He had been there the whole time. He was there when I watched movies. He was there when I tucked Noel in. He was there, feet above our heads, listening to us live our lives. I backed away so fast I nearly fell through the attic opening. "No," I whispered. "No, no, no." My hands shook so violently I nearly missed a rung on the way down. I hit the hallway floor and just sat there, gasping for air, staring at the dark hole in the ceiling. My mom came running from the kitchen. "What's wrong? What happened?" I couldn't find my voice. I just pointed upward, my finger trembling. The police came back, and this time, they didn't dismiss a single word I said. They found more than just the bed. They found a small hole drilled through the floorboards, one that looked directly down into the baby monitor's range. The attic setup wasn't random, and the blankets were still warm. The food wrappers were recent. One officer stood there in the dim attic light, staring at the setup for a long time without saying a word. "He's been here a while," he finally said, his voice flat. "How long?" my dad asked. His voice sounded hollow, like he was already dreading the answer. The officer didn't answer. He didn't have to. The layers of blankets and the sheer amount of trash told the story for him. That night, I couldn't stop replaying everything in my head. The whispering on the monitor, the rhythmic breathing, the way the man had smiled at me, not like a stranger, but like someone who knew me. He hadn't just broken in that night. He'd been watching us for weeks, maybe months. He was learning our routines, listening to our conversations, and waiting for the house to be just empty enough. Waiting for me to be alone with Noelle. The thought of what could have happened to her made me physically sick. We changed everything after that. We installed heavy-duty locks, a high-end alarm system, and cameras that covered every inch of the property. But some things don't just go back to normal. Noelle started waking up screaming in the middle of the night, terrified of the shadows. I stopped sleeping with my bedroom door open. I haven't been able to leave a door unbolted since. Even now, years later, I can't hear static on a radio or a phone without my heart racing. And every Christmas, when the house goes quiet and the tree lights are the only thing glowing in the dark, I still freeze. Because sometimes, I swear I can hear footsteps moving above the ceiling. Slow. Careful. Waiting. You think the locks on your doors keep you safe? This Christmas, I learned the terrifying truth. While I was tucking my sister into bed, a stranger wasn't just breaking in, he was already there. He'd been living in our attic for weeks, watching us through the floorboards and whispering into the baby monitor. I caught him smiling at me from the shadows, and now, I never sleep with the door open. If you want to hear more true stories that will make you check your ceiling tonight, hit that subscribe button. Stay safe out there, because some houses never forget, and some guests never leave.